Or potentially inappropriate. All right, we have gone live.
Cool.
Kind of scary.
We're live.
I think it's too cool.
What?
Start.
So long.
It's so hot. I think it's still.
Betsy, you want to speak into your mic?
Byron's passing.
You are
Keep going.
stepping on.
Is it on?
Yeah, it's.
He's not. It's like being
Am I muted?
Oh, you are now.
Uh,
Keep speaking. Keep.
I like turtles.
Did you turn on this mic? Is the mic
When I
on?
was in high school, I would become chocolate maker.
Did you turn on the mic?
Yes, I just checked. Hello. 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 Hello.
That
It's
one.
not close enough. I just have to speak very closely into this mic. Okay, got it. Okay, let's do hard worship.
Oh, okay. No, Terry's no color on it.
Were you gonna do the different version?
Oh, it's hard to see. Hard to see. Is your thing on? Okay, just keep going.
There it is.
Now
Okay,
it's on.
go for it. Okay, hello, good morning, thank you very much. Amazing grace, all is stripped away, and simply God. Lord, just to bring something that's over, limitless your eyes. I'll bring you more than a song, for the song is in of what you have required. You search much deeper within, and do the great things in you. You're working into my heart. I'm coming back to the heart of worship, and it's all about you. Yeah, can we pause for a sec? Let's go you search much deeper within so that we can try again the entry with Johnny, because we went a little bit off there for some reason. Okay, 2, 3, 4. You search much deeper within, do the way things are been. You're looking into my heart. I'm coming back to the heart of worship. It's all about you. It's all about you, Jesus. I'm sorry for the pain I made. It's all about you. It's all about you, Jesus. Sing it back. No one can express you, Jesus. All I have is yours. I'll be Yeah. Yeah, that's right. So it's the last line is all about you, Jesus. There's 2 bars of D and then they cut. Yeah. Let's do I'm sorry, Lord, for the thing I've made it. 2, 3, 4. I'm sorry, Lord, for made it. It's all about you. It's all about you, Jesus. I'm coming back to the heart of worship. It's all about you. It's all about you, Jesus. I'm sorry for the things it's all about you. It's all about you, Jesus. Okay. I love you, Lord, and I lift my voice to worship you, oh my soul. Rejoice. Take joy, what you hear. Make me a sweet, sweet sound in your ear. And I lift my voice to worship you, oh my soul. Rejoice. Take pride, my King, in what you hear. May it be a sweet, sweet sound in your ear. I love you, Lord, and I lift my voice to worship you, oh my soul, rejoice. Take pride, my King, in what you hear. May it be a sweet, sweet sound in your ear. It is. It's just guitar. Guitar and bass. Let's go back to the end of the first time. I want to hear the way that the piano is coming in because I just didn't. I missed that one. May it be a sweet, sweet sound in your ear. I love you, Lord. Yeah, perfect. Okay, let's do just the last time with the end of the second time going into the third time. So with piano and then everything cuts except for guitars. May it be a sweet, sweet sound in your ear. I love you, Lord, and I lift my voice to worship you, oh my soul, rejoice. Take You're my king, in what you hear. May it be a sweet, sweet sound in your turn your eyes. Turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in His wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of His glory and grace. Turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in His wonderful face. Drum should still be on. And the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of His glory and grace. And the things of earth. And the things of earth. Yeah, you're cutting it out here. Will go straight. So you just don't play. You play both times, except for the repeat. Yeah. Sorry. Let's do and the things last time. Of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of His glory and grace. Brielle, can you see my hand when I'm like at the end?
I could look.
You can see it from there? Like if I go here? Yeah, okay.
Wait, so then on the last time, like I'm putting on.
So you play twice full,
Okay.
and then when I repeat anything, just bring your numbers.
Oh, so you're repeating the last time.
Yeah. What? Yeah. I don't have any notes for this one. Does anyone remember starting fourth song? Really, I'm starting this one, right? No. Okay, this one's you. Sorry, nobody's starting. I'm starting. Yes. Okay. Jesus, Lamb of God, worthy is your name. Jesus, Lamb of God, worthy is your name. Oh, guys. Alright, let's do it again. 2-second line of what I'm doing. Worthy is your name. You can still go in Ready? Worthy is your name. Good. Yeah. That's done. I actually want to sing chorus at the end. I want to sing that twice instead of just once. So we gotta write that.
When we do verse one after the instrumental, yeah. Sorry, I just sang for them since last week.
Okay, and then Terry, pretend that you're doing the response. So turn your eyes. Turn your eyes. And the things of life will go strange in the light of His glory and grace. Turn your eyes upon me. Look full in His wonderful face, and the things of God will grow strange glory and grace, and the things of earth grow strangely dim in the light of His glory and grace. Oh, okay, good. I think we're okay. Anybody else?
We did that in Victoria, but when we do it from transition from the other song, the other one, the second one, it'll be, yeah, so it's fine. It's okay. So for the response, he's going to do 94.
So I'm not sure how. It's kind of like weird. It's not great.
Yeah, it feels different. I'm okay with it, but I'm okay if you change it. You just have to be aware of that, okay? Are you okay with that?
Weird. So remember to do
You have to, because once the song that's before it, that needs to be from. Yeah. So there's very low chance of always being
Okay, yeah. Anyone else have anything they want to practice? No? Okay, good. Cool, we're done.
That's the way this
How should I
Send it by messenger, Facebook,
to yourself?
no, to Brian.
Are you good at that?
Like, I have no idea.
No, I need you. Because Alex is doing very good.
Yeah.
And they keep on crushing you, like going tomorrow. Yes, Alex is not like, I see it. Surprised he comes over. Alex just go over, it's over. No, I am mediocre. I'm not very good. I own it. I figured it out. Yeah, I don't like you. Yeah, I would like because I'm so sorry. Yeah, just slow it down.
No.
like it's too much of the. All right.
Oh,
You know that? No, not like this.
yeah, what are Oh, it might be a Kathy crack. That's why. Yeah, she came to the tournament correction.
Today is. Oh yeah, we need to try to make it. What if we want? I know that way.
What? Yeah, it's been like that for like 3 or 4 months.
Just put me and my friends together. What's the link? I don't know the YouTube.
Oh, you sent it to me.
So I know how to do this. I know how to do it online. But just like I go to YouTube and I just go to Messenger. What's that? No, I don't know how to do this.
Let me know when we're ready to go.
Oh, we should go.
Yeah?
Once we go, I
Okay.
I should give it back for long.
Hi everyone, we're going to be starting soon, so please take your seats. I also encourage you to move up a little bit since there's a lot of space in between all of you. Get nice and cozy, make some post-reading week friends. If not, just do it so that you can keep warm if it gets cold in here. Ryan can't tell. I want to trip on. Good morning. Welcome to Simply Church. Please take your seat. Thank you. Let's stand for worship. So this week, I was really excited because I really wanted to get like a KitchenAid stand mixer because I'm really like into bread making. So I basically spent my entire week on Kijiji / the internet in general, just like literally refreshing the page like 3 times a day just to see if there were like anything that I could get. So I think, I mean, it's good to make bread and stuff like that and have hobbies, but I think definitely it wasn't a good week in terms of my priorities and really like putting God first and spending the same amount of time that I spent on Kijiji, like reading the Bible and praying and talking to God. So, not a best moment, but something to learn from and something to share, I think. And I chose Heart of Worship because every time I sing this song, it reminds me of what God is looking for. It's a very sincere song, and it really gets to the heart of it. So just us singing, us like giving our voices to God, but it's really looking into the heart. So even if you have a really crappy voice, or even if you don't like to sing, and you still stand for worship, and your heart is there, that is what God is looking for. So I just want to encourage you guys to take a moment and reflect on that, and remember that before you start singing to God. When the music fades. And how is it when simply come? Won't you wait nothing that's a word, but that's your heart. I'll break it more than a song, for a song in itself is not what you have. You search much deeper within, the way things appear. You're looking into my heart. I'm driving back to the car version. It's all about you. It's all about you. See, I'm sorry for everything. It's all about you. It's all about you. All I have is every single regret. I'll bring you more than a song. The song is not what you got. It's such much deeper within. The way we go, looking into I'm driving back to my car. It's all about you. It's all about you. I'm sorry for everything. It's all about you. It's all about you. It's coming back to the heart of worship. It's all about you. It's all about you. I'm sorry, Lord, for the pain. It's all about you. It's all about you, Jesus. I love you, Lord. I love you, Lord, and I lift my voice to worship you. Our soul rejoice. Take joy, my King, in what you hear. May it be a sweet, sweet sound in your ear. Let's just have the guys sing it. I love you, Lord, and I lift my voice to worship you. Our soul rejoice. Take joy in what you hear. May it be a sweet, sweet sound in your ear. All right, ladies, it's our turn. I love you, Lord, and I lift my voice to worship you, oh my soul. Rejoice, rejoice, my King, in what you hear. May it be a sweet, sweet sound in your ear. Turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in His wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of His glory and grace. Turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in His wonderful face, and the things of earth will come strangely dim in the light of His glory and grace. And the things of earth, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of His glory and grace. Jesus, Lamb of God, worthy is your name. Jesus, Lamb of God, worthy is your name. You're the strength when I am weak. You're the strength Okay, something that I really like about this song is split version. So I'm gonna get the left side and sing Jesus, Lamb of God chorus, and the right side is gonna go back to this one. Ryan, if you could sing the Jesus, Lamb of God chorus, then I can do the first one because you're really loud and then everyone can hear you. Okay, let's go. Ready? 3, Thanks for worshiping wholeheartedly. Let's sit down.
Well, it is the last day of reading week, and very happy to see some of you have returned, and some who were here last week are not here this week. It's kind of interesting. But anyways, so happy to have you here. If you're here for the first time, welcome to Simply Church. The church is part of the Associated Gospel Churches in Canada, and if you'd like to know more about ourselves, about who we are, there are some brochures, and you can always, of course, talk to me as well. If you like a drink or anything, we're Bible. They're available in the corner there. Just help yourself. We also have a time of refreshments following service, so happy for you to join us today. For that, we have macaroni and ham. Yes. And I believe blueberry cheesecake. Is that right? Berry cheesecake or something. So anyways, tax receipts. If you have not received your tax receipt yet, please contact me. Or if you think it's wrong, also please contact me. I think everybody's okay so far, so we're good. Sunday school is around the corner, just by the washroom, on the classroom facing the washrooms there on the corner. Jonathan is teaching it this week, and go ahead and join us for that. The University next door, very interesting. A lot of people have been going and asking a lot of questions, and if you want to know more about it, please join us today. We are also, if you need rides, we're starting to get warmer, but I heard today we have a severe winter storm on effect. Winds are gusting up to 120 kilometers. Anyways, we'll try to get out of here as soon as possible. It's supposed to hit early afternoon, so 15 centimeters of snow. Anyways, but if you need a ride, contact Patsy, who was just leading worship this morning, and we'll try to give you a ride. There are some major pickup locations, but if you're outside of those areas, we'll be happy to pick you up if we can accommodate you. Grocery run this week, Tuesday, 7:30. If you are interested in grocery run, please sign up. If you need groceries but can't come, please send us a grocery list. We'd be happy to pick it up for you. Today's the last day we're receiving offerings for the church planting. AGC is involved in many churches in Canada, including those that are new church plants. And one of them is the church plant at Fairview Road down in Kitchener. So that's very exciting. We always make it a love offering every year. If you can, please donate $5. If you don't worry about it. The church has it in the budget as well. So worship is one of those amongst many things that happens here. If you're interested in serving a Simply Church and don't know exactly what capacity you can serve it, please contact us. And Ryan's on AV this morning. You can contact him. We'd be happy to integrate you into service. Not because we want you to serve, but because God wants you to serve. And that's the most important. If you like to drop in at the office, it's always open 9:30 to 5:30 every day, and then usually later at night as well. You can come by if there's lots of space for you to do, relax or study, whatever you need. As well, if you like, there is, what's happening this week? Bible study for grad cell. And the grad cell is for those who are in the post-undergrad age. So if you are in that demographic group, you can join us for grad cell. And sign up over there immediately. And there's a whole bunch of per items and things on the agenda as well. It's kind of strange, like when there's 2 Sundays of reading week, you lose a lot of people, and unfortunately they're going to miss out on Haggai. Haggai is a very, very short book, and there's only 4 sections. And so for those of you who haven't been here before or have missed out because of reading week or whatever, we are actually in the last study of this tiny little book. And so we're just going to dive right into it. I'm going to do it more like a Sunday school class because it's very interesting, this last little bit. Many have commented that they do see their lives in somewhat of a parallel to what's going on in the book of Haggai. And we live, our lives are lived in the power of the perspective of Haggai. And it's very interesting. So we read that he is the most successful of the prophets in the Old Testament. In 4 short months, in 4 short messages, he is able to take a nation that has stalled in terms of their success for God, coming from a defeated nation in captivity to a nation that's in victory mode. And God knows that we really do need more men and women like Haggai in our world today as we face many of the challenges and circumstances of the world. We need people like Haggai to come up and to encourage the church to step out in faith and to transform the world around us. 4 months, 4 messages, 3 days, and he's able to transform a whole nation. And of course, he wasn't alone. There were, as we noted, there were many prophets during that time of the post-Babylonian captivity. There was Zechariah, who was with him. And we mentioned that, of course, Joshua, the priest, was prominent at this time. And Zerubbabel was the prince, the royalty associated with this time of post-Babylonian captivity. So he was a prophet, but he wasn't alone. There was all the other elements that were necessary, defined by God, that made God's people, his chosen people, a holy nation. Those elements are all there. And in fact, it is very rare that God's people is ever alone. They may feel alone, like Elijah always felt like he was alone. The whole world was against him and he stood by himself. But Elijah himself was a long way from being alone. Matter of fact, God tells Elijah that there's 7,000 people who are just like you, who have the same feeling and perspective as you. And so I think in some ways there is a message underlying this that for you and I, it's just to remind us that no matter what the circumstances of life are, whenever you feel like you are standing by yourself, no matter how isolated you may feel, that you are never alone. God is always there, and so are other believers. But that's a different story, a different message. And we're looking and concentrating on what exactly Haggai had to say to these people. He was sent by God to encourage and enable this nation that had been decimated and now have returned to that promised land. And he's done that, and he's done that in several ways. And the messages that we've presented talk about each one of the prophecies. In the very first one, he reminded the nation that they are God's special people. They have a special covenant, special pact with God. And if they kept their end of the covenant, their end of the bargain, then God would keep his end. If they follow God's laws, his commandments, his statutes, his decrees, they will live under the blessings of God. And Haggai simply reminded them that they need to live their lives by putting God first. If you want to live under the blessings of God, you have to acknowledge and put God first in your life. First things first. It is not in this situation there, it is not their house that was most important, but God's house had to come first. They're so busy as they came back into this land that was promised to them. They're so busy and occupied with building up their own homes, yet forgotten about the Lord's house. It was not your money, it was always God's money. It was not your blessing, it was always God's blessing. It was not your welfare that's of significance, but it was God's welfare. And the moment you put God first, God will be with you. And that's the promise and the prophecy that Haggai made to the people. And they observed it, and they obeyed it. and things began to change. And in the same way, the message was clear for us today, that when you face the big struggles in your life, the first question you need to ask of yourself is, have I put God first in these things? If you got nothing but trouble, did you put God first? If you got nothing but bills, have you put God first? Have you got nothing but work and no rewards? Is God first? First things first. As soon as you say God first, God says to the Israelites, I will be with you. And that's what we found as we transitioned from the first message to the second message, is that when the nation decided to put God first, God responded with words of encouragement, said, you are not alone. You think you're facing all these obstacles and circumstances and struggles by yourself, but if you put me first, I will be with you. My presence is with you. For that generation that I was speaking to, first things first meant that God had to be focused and put first, especially in the agenda of his presence. And that presence was symbolized by the temple, the rebuilding of the temple. Understandably, they came to this land that was decimated and they needed to build their own shelter. But they were busy building their own homes and glorifying their own homes, that they were leaving God's house, his temple that had been destroyed, in shambles. But when the word of the Lord came to them through Haggai, they began to focus building the house of the Lord. But as they were building this house of the Lord, we found something else was amiss. They remembered what the house of the Lord looked like. The beauty of the Solomon's temple that was created. And what they were building wasn't even close to what they hoped for. They remember Solomon's temple. They had the book of Ezekiel. They had visions of that new temple, more glorious than what they could have even imagined. But in their construction of the second version, it was nowhere near what they had seen before. Some of them were still alive who remembered the temple before it was destroyed. And it looked pale. It looked like a shadow of what stood before. And as a result of their works, as they're looking at it, they began to become very discouraged. They were discouraged because they lost the point that was most important. They lost focus about why it was important to rebuild the temple, the house of the Lord. Because they missed that essential point about what that temple was. It was not the temple that was important. It was what it symbolized that was important. It wasn't the actual physical elements within the temple, but rather what the temple symbolized in terms of the presence of the Lord. And the reality was this: God was with them. Whether they made a big temple, a small temple, an ornate temple, one that was very plain. It wasn't the temple itself, the reality of that temple itself, that was important, but the reality that it symbolized God's presence with them. And besides that, they also needed to keep their eyes on the future, that God was not finished yet. The temple was not the last word in temples. Just as Solomon's temple was as gorgeous as it was not the last word in the temples that God was about to establish. There was a day coming, and it was the physical, but rather it's an issue of the heart. It is a matter of attitude and purpose. You don't become holy just because you are surrounded by holy things and holy people. But the reverse is very true, that unholy things are very contagious. They profane the holy, they defile the temple, they contaminate God's place. And indeed, in the words of Haggai, these people have profaned the house of the Lord that they were building. And in their attempt to build with their own hands, with their own agenda, they did even more damage. As Haggai preached to them during this very important time, which is the beginning of the winter harvest season, they needed to keep focus. Because they were very tempted, of course, to deal with the urgency of planting and to lose sight of the urgency of the temple. And if they didn't keep focus, it would be right back where they started at the very beginning of the book of Haggai. And they had to stay true. But their work for God had to come first. And God gave them that assurance in that third prophecy that if they continue on their path of putting God first, that they will be blessed. And that's so true. When you stay connected to God, you will always be blessed. As we come to the last prophecy, the book of Haggai begins to take a very interesting turn. You see, one of the problems in studying the Old Testament is that the Old Testament prophets constantly switch between present reality and future. And they often talk about a very contemporary situation of what's ailing the nation. But quite often, implied in there, or sometimes directly in there, are texts about the future. And often it comes about without very clear delineation in the text. In one sense, you can't blame them. They were under, of course, God's inspiration, and they weren't always very clear in understanding themselves what they are preaching about, what they're prophesying. We find that very clear in 1 Peter chapter 1, where Peter talks about these guys were moved and motivated, and they had some sense of what was happening, but not a very total, clear sense of what they were prophesying. And if you look at the book of Haggai, you'll see this break in 4 messages. That the first 2, well, the first 3, we would say, are very contemporary messages. It's relevant for the people at that time, but this very last one is very different. 2 of them, for sure, of those messages are focused on the present status of Jerusalem, pointing out to the temple and its devastation and the fact that they weren't taking care of God's temple first. And interestingly enough, in those 2 messages, that repetitive phrase, give careful thought, is a reminder that we need to think clearly about the Word of God. Haggai uses that phrase 5 times in those 2 messages, to give careful thought. In the other 2 messages, Haggai uses a very unique phrase, and that is a future text in the words, I will shake. If you read last time, he said he was going to shake nations and kingdoms. He's going to shake the earth and the heavens. And in these 2 messages, these last 2, this will is certainly points to future prophetic events. So as we come to this last of the Haggai messages, it is a short one, only 4 verses. We're not going to do the audio Bible thing. I think we can manage 4 verses this morning. But the very interesting thing about these 4 verses, it's actually pointed and spoken to one person, a person by the name of Zerubbabel. Now, you may not have heard of that name, Zerubbabel, before, but let's read the passage together and we'll see if we can understand Zerubbabel. Whoops. Keep on going. There we go. Okay. Let's read together. The word of the Lord came a second time to Haggai on the 24th day of the month. Speak to Zerubbabel, governor of Judah, saying, I am about to shake the heavens and the earth, and to overthrow the thrones of kingdoms. I am about to destroy the strength of the kingdoms of the nations, and overthrow the chariots and their riders. And the horses and their riders shall go down, every one by the sword of his brother. On that day declares the Lord of hosts, I will take you, O Jerusalem, my servant, the son of Shephah, declares the Lord, and make you a signet ring, for I have chosen you, declares the Lord of hosts. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for the words that have come through your servant. And we ask that you may indeed open our eyes, open our minds, and we may understand your prophecy. Some words spoken over 2,000 years ago that is as relevant to us today. For we are your servants. We want to honor you. We want to learn of you. We want to be encouraged and empowered through your words. For we offer ourselves to be transformed by the living God, the power of your Spirit. We pray in the mighty name of Jesus Christ. All right. Zerubbabel. So who is he? Well, if you use one of those concordance things and look in your look him up, he shows up in 4 major books. So he's in the Old Testament, he's in Ezra, he's in Nehemiah, he's very prominent in Zechariah, and of course, he's in 2 messages here in Haggai. And so why is he so prominent? Well, here it points out in the verses he's the governor, but you have to read the other passages to understand what significant it is, because he is actually the leader who brings the first of the exile Israelites back from Babylon to Jerusalem. Okay, he's the leader of the first returning group, and it appears if you look at Ezra, he actually has 2 names. He has 2 names. His other name is Sheshbazzar. Okay? Sheshbazzar. And it's not uncommon in those days for people to have 2 names, right? Some people did, a lot of us sitting here have 2 names, right? So some of you call me Tim. It's not my legal name. It's not my real name. But it's just my convenient name. When I was growing up in Quebec, and we moved over, the problem is my first name is actually Ting. Right? And so in Quebec, you understand the French language has a missing vowel sound, or a consonant sound, right? Which is that you don't pronounce the letter. How many of you took French? Which letter don't you pronounce? It's silent. H. Close. You have to pronounce that, but H. You don't pronounce the letter H. H is silent in French. I mean, remember that? Yeah. Not reminds me. But you see, when I was growing up, that became a problem because my English name was Ting, and so all these people would go, "Hey, you Ting over there! What type of Ting are you? You ugly Ting." And so my parents thought that I would have a self-esteem issue going on, and because of that, they gave me a different name. So after the first, couple of months in school, we legally added a name to my name, which is why my name is Timothy, Tim, because Tim and Ting are close. And so you guys probably all know me as Tim, but the government of Canada does not know me as Tim. All my legal documents does not say Tim. In the same manner back then, they would have 2 types of names. They would have a very legalized name, and they would also have a very common and popular name. So you'll find that if you're studying Zerubbabel, there's actually 2 names for it. Okay? Now he and Joshua, the high priest at this time, are very prominent because these are the 2 men that are leading the people back to Jerusalem. And they are the ones who are leading the people in the building of the temple. Okay? Which makes sense. You've got the priest who will reside in the temple, and then of course you have the leader of the people to tell them what to do. Zerubbabel is noted in the text as the son of Shealtiel. Okay? Shealtiel. And when you're looking at Matthew chapter 1, verse 12, you will find the genealogy in this. And this is important. If he's mentioned in the New Testament under genealogy, what does that imply about his status? He's under the line of David. He's part of the kingly line, right? And he is a former, Jesus is a descendant of him, right? The point, in fact, is this. Had Israel had a king at this time, okay? If there was a king, Zerubbabel would be the king of Israel. But obviously, they don't have a king because they were destroyed as a nation. And I guess in some sense, Zerubbabel was a king without a country. So he had no kingdom, and the best you can offer him is a governorship, as recognized by the Babylonians. In many ways, Zerubbabel is a very mysterious type of person. If you look at all the different passages about him, it's very, very confusing sometimes. But we're not going to go into the mystery of it all, and how he comes into the scene, and how he plays out, and what he has to do with the lineage of Jesus Christ. We're just interested in the prophecy this morning. So the prophecy is this. There's a promise that's made to him, right? If you look at the text, Haggai gives a message to Zerubbabel, and that message is that God is going to shake the kingdom, shake heaven and earth, right? He's going to overthrow kingdoms. Royal thrones will be overthrown. The power of foreign kingdoms will be overcome, and warriors will be destroyed. Okay, chariots and horses, and all of them being killed by the sword of the blood. Now that's very, very interesting, because there is one time when we do know that the chariots and the riders were all destroyed. And that is where? The crossing of the Red Sea, right? In the time of Moses. Because Moses is like leading them into the promised land, and the Egyptians were following after them to chase them down. Remember, they crossed over a dry land on the Red Sea. And so, a very interesting side note. This week, it was released that they may have actually found the bodies of those people. It's in, if you want the link, just ask me for it. I'll send it to you. It's very fascinating. We have actually dug up some beds and found chariots and horses embedded. It's very fascinating. Anyway, regardless, without a doubt, this is a very marvelous promise. So you got to realize here's Haggai who's given 3 messages to the nation, and now he's giving one message directly to Jerusalem, who is basically a king without a kingdom. Like he understands his lineage. He knows exactly where he came from. And he suddenly realized he is a king without a kingdom. Now, I think somehow I like to think of myself like that a little bit. So my mother's lineage extends all the way back to the rulers in Beijing. So my mother's grandfather, so my great-grandfather, is we're not exactly sure how he's related, but he was one of the generals sent down from Beijing to Macau. And basically he was there during the Opium War. He was the general in charge of Macau during the Opium War. So my mother's side of her last name is the last name Wang, which is similar to God if you write it out in Chinese characters. Yeah, if you understand Chinese, you'll know what I'm talking about. So somehow she's, the daughter of this general who may have some royal blood in them, so I would have some royal blood in me. So I like to think of myself somewhat as a ruler of some nation, something like that. So Jerubbaal is like that, right? You gotta understand, he understands his lineage. He knows where his grandfather, who he was, and we'll talk about that in a second. But he will never be king, because he's living in a land without a kingdom. And the reality is, history says that he will never see this promise fulfilled. But this promise that Haggai spoke through, from God through Haggai to him, is a promise that has never been fulfilled in his lifetime. And during his lifetime, at best, Israel would be a second-class citizen. They would have some freedom, had the ability to rebuild the temple and reclaim some land, but will never be recognized as an independent nation. Will never be a kingdom on earth until that stage in history that was set on May 14th, 1948. 48? 47? 47? 48? Somebody Google it. I haven't lost. 47, 48. It's somewhere around there. But Tom understands what I'm talking about. This is one of the greatest things that has happened in your lifetime. Well, we'll call it your lifetime. Our lifetime. There's several prophecies that have been fulfilled in our lifetime. One of the prophecies, the Valley of the Dry Bones, the coming again of the nation of Israel to be recognized as an independent country, a nation on earth once again. And that was subsequent to Second World War. Kind of scary now, right? Because we've gone from Babylon over 2,000 years ago to the destruction of Israel, the 70 years in exile, and the prophecies after that says that Israel will rise again as a nation, and that nation will what? Never be defeated again. You heard it? 1948, I'm sorry. 1948, okay. The memory's still good. If you were an Israelite during that time and you were able to read the book of Daniel, right? You understand Daniel. Daniel was one of the young people who were present during the 70 years Babylonian captivity. Right? And he wrote, and he was a counsel to the kings of Babylon. You would understand that Israel was under the domination of Babylon, with Persia, and then a move over to the domination of Greece, a move over from there to the domination of Rome, and so forth. It isn't until 1948 that they would become a nation once again. And herein lies the problem. We got Zerubbabel, who has a promise from God that he's going to overthrow nations, that he will shake the earth and the heavens, but he is not the one who will ever witness this promise. And we need to now begin to look into understanding who he is. Zerubbabel's grandfather, okay, was a king by the name of Jeconiah, Jeconiah, okay, Jeconiah. And he was the third of Judah's last 4 kings. Okay? So if you look at Matthew chapter 11, you'll see that his distinguishing thing was he was the worst of the last 4 kings of Judah. Okay, he only reigned for 3 months. Okay, so what Haggai did in 4 months, basically was the reverse of what he did in 3 months. Because in those 3 months that he reigned, basically what happened was the Babylonians overran Israel. And he was taken captive to Babylon, and he lived an imprisoned life. Now, his uncle, Zedekiah, takes his place on the throne in Judah. Okay? But when Jerusalem falls during this time, basically what happens, he tries to escape, and he's captured by the Babylonians, and his sons are killed in front of him. This is like one of those really bad movies, that Chinese bad movies, right? So he witnesses the killing of his sons, and just to make it even worse, they then gouge out his eyes. So he doesn't die. I think if you witness the killing of your son, you'd rather be dead. But rather, his sons are killed, and his eyes are gouged out, and ultimately he dies in captivity in Babylon. Now, the subsequent king, Jehoiakim, he will live. Okay, and after the death of the most famous Babylonian ruler, the guy's name is Nebuchadnezzar, or Nebuchadnezzar, because I like to call him the butcher. You have to understand the story behind Nebuchadnezzar. He was pretty crazy man. So Nebuchadnezzar, after he dies, there is another king of Babylon that comes into the scene, and his name, actually, if you look in your Bible, his name is actually called Evil Merodach, right? Merodach. Or if you look in I think in Zechariah, or Jeremiah, you'll find that his name is also known as All-Will Murdoch. All evil Murdoch, okay? That's how it's A-W-E-L, All-Will Murdoch. So it's like the all evil Murdoch. Anyways, he becomes king. And technically, Judah still has a king. The line is still there. Okay, Zerubbabel is alive. And so the kingly line is still alive. Okay? But what makes a little difference is what the reality is this. The king of Babylon can say that you have no king. Okay? You can destroy the nation, you can take them away from their land, and you can say that you have no king. But it's not what the king of Babylon says that's important. It's what the king of hosts says. What the king of heaven says. What the king of kings says. And the king of kings says that you do have a king. He may not have a throne to sit on that's physical. He may not have a land that he was promised to reside in. But you still have a king. And what he says is this, you've got to go to Jeremiah chapter 22. Sorry, there's a little bit of a background in order to understand this promise. In Jeremiah chapter 22, basically, you read through the prophecy there. There's two things that this prophesies that is important. One is that no descendants of Jehoiakim will ever sit on the throne of David, nor reign in Jerusalem again. Okay? And if anybody who makes this claim, if he were the signet ring, God will pull it off his hand. Okay? If you put on the signet ring, God will pull it off his hand. So this is in Jeremiah 22. So Jeremiah 22 basically says that no descendant of Jehoiakim will ever sit on the throne of David. They will not reign in Jerusalem. And if you were to put on a signet ring, God will basically take it off his finger. Now, here's the problem. Zerubbabel has this problem. If he is a descendant of Jehoiakim, he has no future. The prophecy for him in Jeremiah basically says he has no future as a king. But clearly in the text, Haggai has come up to this man who recognizes what has been spoken in Jeremiah, but God says he's going to take the descendants of Jehoiakim and make that descendant his signet ring. Okay, so you have two things. You got a man who grew up without a kingdom, knowing that he comes from a kingly line, and the prophecies from Jeremiah says that there is no way him or any descendants of that line will sit on the throne in Jerusalem again. And even if they attempted to do that, God will remove the signet ring from them, meaning he will remove them from their power. And yet Haggai says this is opposite. So how do we deal with this problem? Well, I guess there's two ways to deal with the problem. One would be to say this, is that one can say that Zerubbabel is not, in fact, a true descendant of Jehoiakim. Okay? That somewhere in this history that is recorded there, it's been messed up. It's incorrect. That Zerubbabel is not a true descendant, but rather an adoptive son of Shealtiel. Okay, but he's an adopted son. Okay, so if you're reading Matthew 12, he's actually just an adopted son. He's not the real heir. No DNA. And there's some reason to believe this is true. But I think you would have to say that, one, the Bible is wrong, that there are some errors in Scripture, which we believe there is no errors in Scripture. And I think the more important thing is that we missed the point of understanding this prophecy that Haggai is speaking to Zerubbabel. You see, the text is not so much about Zerubbabel, the person, but rather Zerubbabel, the picture. You see, Zerubbabel is a representation of the picture that God wanted to convey. He's spoken 3 messages that was for the nation. Now he's spoken one message to a very direct descendant that will have ultimately become the great-great-great-grandfather of Jesus Christ. And the picture that Zerubbabel is going to represent, because the first 3 are about pictures in some ways about a nation, is this, that first, none of the things that were predicted would happen in the lifetime of Zerubbabel. Okay, everything that Haggai's talking about is about a future, but it never happened in Zerubbabel's future. So, in his actual presence in his lifetime. So the problem is, of course, then what's really happening? And the words used is very clear. God said that I will shape heaven and earth. And clearly he doesn't do that during the time of Zerubbabel. And will is always pointing about the future. And Haggai picks up this thinking when he says in verse 23, on that day. So here's the prophecies that will occur. And the fulfillment of those prophecies on that day, right? On that day, when God shakes the heavens and the earth, on that day, God says, I will take Zerubbabel, who is now long dead and gone. I will take Zerubbabel and make you my signet ring. This is what we call part of the Messianic prophecies. That Zerubbabel is a picture of what God is going to do through Jesus Christ, the Messiah. Now, let's go back a step here. First of all, you have to understand what a signet ring is, right? So, how many of you know what a signet ring is or have seen some? There are some in Russia I've seen, very beautiful ones. Signet rings are what ancient kings used to use, and powers, authorities, rulers, dictators. Basically, if you have the ring, it dictates that you have power and authority or ownership. And usually, on the ring is really big face on it, right? Now, the big face is usually some type of carving or something, maybe a name, maybe a picture. And that emblem, let's call it emblem, would be a unique identifier to who you are. Nobody else would have that. If anybody else had that, they would be killed. And that is what, and if you watch Game of Thrones, you know, you got these letters, you put a dab of what? Wax on it, and then the guy goes and what? Puts his ring on it, the wet wax, the hot wax, and seals it. Right? And that impression of that signet ring from the king would, you know, certify this document as genuine. It's kind of like a notary, public notary stamp. That's about the equivalent I can think of a lawyer stamp or something. So we have that, like, remember evil Queen Jezebel? She took King Ahab's signet ring and wrote letters on his name. Remember that story? First Kings. So you can read that. Daniel, we're talking about the Babylonian Daniel. Remember the story in Daniel? And Daniel was thrown into what? The lion's den. And there was a stone that was rolled over. And that stone was sealed with the signet ring. Okay? So there's a lot of stories in there. So Zerubbabel and the signet ring, these things come together because he is the governor, right, who's given permission to lead his people back to Jerusalem, rebuild the city, rebuild the temple, and he himself is of royal descent, royal blood. And because he's just a governor, he doesn't have that signet ring. And as a matter of fact, God had told in Jeremiah that if any one of you and your descendants from Jehoiakim and Leon decides that you want to take on that role as king and put on the signet ring, I will remove it from you. That's what the Lord said. And so Jehoiakim, the line of Jehoiakim would realize that any descendant of him who tried to do this would be going against what God had decreed. But in this particular passage, Zerubbabel's told that he will be God's signet ring and it will not be removed. In Haggai's prophecy, God is giving Zerubbabel basically hope, encouragement. The governor is chosen for a very unique and noble purpose, but as God's signet ring, Zerubbabel would have ascended beyond just the position of governor. He would have a very unique and noble purpose. As God's signet ring, he would be given the place of honor and authority of a representation of God on earth as part of the kingly line, the Davidic line, the renewal of his covenant with the descendants of David. And because of that, Zerubbabel would be a representation of the future of the coming king. Judah has a future, and they're looking forward to the day that the Messiah would return, the son of David, who would come one day to overturn the royal thrones, shatter the powers of foreign kingdoms, and establish Israel once again And that nation will never falter. Will never fall. Zerubbabel is often called my servant, and that title is given as a messianic reference in the Old Testament. You'll find examples of it all over, like 2 Samuel, Kings, Isaiah has tons of reference about my servant. It's about Jesus Christ, the coming Messiah. The triad of servant, son, and signet creates a very special combination of words and encouragement to these people at that time. You see, Zerubbabel becomes a picture of that coming king, the Messiah that had been prophesied to them. Will establish his people in the promised land, construct even a grander temple, and lead the righteous in everlasting worship. And that kingdom shall never falter, will never be defeated. You read about that in Zechariah chapter 6. Why does Haggai end with such a very confusing text? Well, if you lived during that time, you would not find it confusing at all. You would know the prophecies of Micah, you would know the prophecies of Isaiah, you would recognize the promise of the Messiah, the one who would rescue them and save them and establish his kingdom forever. See, to Israel, the words of Haggai is most comforting. It is most comforting because they will now recognize all those elements are there for the kingdom to rise again. They have a priest. They have a temple. Now they have a king. Because they have all these elements, they have a future. And what they're doing is not in vain. That they have a hope, and that is a promise that they can bank. See, God is sovereign. They had to recognize that it's not the circumstances of life that overshadows the importance of God. That God is beyond the struggles, beyond the circumstances, beyond your labors, your fears, your trepidations, beyond your struggles. And by putting God first, the sovereignty of God will reign forever. And that's important as they continue to strive to rebuild the kingdom of God. I didn't give any illustrations so far. I'm going to give you one illustration of how this plays out. 3 Sundays ago now? This is almost 3 Sundays. 3 Sundays ago, my mother fell. Now, you have to understand, my mother is a nurse and she's very stubborn. And one of the stubbornness in her streak is that she has a bum knee. We've known about her knee and her weakness in one knee for several years. And we actually went and she had got saw an orthopedic surgeon and things like that. And the recommendation is to do a knee replacement, right? And she wanted nothing to do with that. She said, I'm old. I don't know how many more years I'll live. The surgery and the recuperation would take at least 6 months. And she didn't want anything to do with it. And so she decided that she's just going to try herbal medicine. She drinks this, she eats these raisins that are soaked in gin. And some of you understand that one. Your parents may do it, so it's supposed to help with arthritis and things like that. And she got a cane because it got so bad that she got a cane. But we've always told her, you know, Mom, we really need to put you in a walker. She doesn't want to be seen in a walker. Don't want anything to do with a walker. She's a stubborn old lady. I bought them, what do you call those pads? I did for physiotherapy. What do you call them? TENS, right? A TENS. So you got these little pads that you put on and it sends electric surge. It's called TENS machine, right? TENS. So I got my parents one of those. It was for my dad, really, for helping his circulation. But then my mom found it was very good for her knee, so she's been using that. And then she's saying, I'm getting better. And that's when it happened. She suddenly said, I'm getting better. I don't need my cane. I said, Mom, you need your cane to walk. Like, you should walk with your cane. And in her arrogance, I think God taught her a lesson. I like to think of it that way, because she's always saying, you know, you don't wear your hat, you get cold. So it's my turn to, my sister and I turn the tables on. And so she was without her cane. My father had dropped her off in the garage. It's an underground garage, so there's no water, there's no ice, nothing. It's flat. And the bag that she was holding was some oranges in it, broke. And when the oranges started falling out, what do you instinctively do? You try to catch them. And in that moment of instinct, she said, she quickly reached over to try to catch it, but her knee gave. Her center of gravity shifted, and she fell. And in falling, this is what happened. She broke her femur in 3 places and fractured her hip. So the worst of what my sister and I talked to her about as an old lady, you're going to break your hip, you're going to break your leg, and you're going to regret it if you don't do the knee surgery. And not getting a walker. And all these things, you know, we could say, I told you so. How many of you wanted to say that to your parents? I told you so? Yeah. That was one of those conversations we had with them. Now what? Circumstances. And of course, all the worst things we were thinking about could have happened. She could have hit her head, but she didn't hit her head. Blood clots, all sorts of things. She ended up in emergency. So here, we're moving from sovereignty and circumstances. And in the circumstances, all we can think about is all the worst things that could happen. That my mother's been shot. Right? All the implications of all the stories I've heard about people breaking their hips, ending up in all sorts of situations. And the worst of it is death. In her situation, because my mother is one of the most godly people I know, and recognizes the sovereignty of God. And in spite of her circumstances, in spite of her arrogance and not listening, this is what God did. She broke it on Saturday night around 9 o'clock. She ended up at the hospital where my brother-in-law's brother. So my sister is married to Preston. Preston has 3 siblings altogether, there's 3 of them in the family, 3 boys. All 3 of the boys are gone. Their father is also a doctor. He's actually the top orthopedic surgeon in Montreal. And my brother-in-law, he's an emergency room doctor. The youngest one, Frank, or Frankie, we call him Frankie, he followed his father's footsteps and became an orthopedic surgeon. Of all the hospitals that they could have taken her to, they took her to the hospital where my brother-in-law's brother, Frankie, is the orthopedic surgeon. And not only that, he is also the orthopedic surgeon that was on call that night. So he saw her right away, and of course, because he is the surgeon on call, he could make whatever recommendation he decides. He was scheduled to do 2 surgeries on Sunday, but he pulled what I would call an unethical type of thing, was to move my mother early and do her surgery. Right? All right, so you think that's a coincidence? The lady who's in charge of her follow-up, which is a social worker basically, works at the particular hospital that my mother ended up at, who is also the sister of 2 people who actually went to church here, David Young and his wife, Jenny. And David Young grew up in Montreal with me. And Jenny, who married here, her sister was actually the social worker they put in charge of her case. So when my mother saw the social worker said, Mrs. White, what are you doing here? My goodness. So because of the social worker, she was able to, once again, pull some strings and put my mother into rehab hospital almost immediately. She went into rehab hospital. She had surgery on the Sunday. I kind of mentioned it on that morning to pray for her. She was walking within 12 hours. They removed her from her morphine drip within 16 hours. I was there when they took it. She hadn't pumped in 12 hours, so they said, you don't need it. You don't want it? And she goes, no, I don't need it. I don't feel any pain. It's like, oh my goodness, are you crazy, lady? You know, I remember when I had my ankle surgery, I snapped my ankle off, and I was in hospital. Man, I wanted that morphine drip all the time. But 12 hours later, she didn't even pump it. And then she was walking. She walked 15 feet the first day. So because of that, and the social worker that was with her said, okay, not a problem. You're doing so well. We're going to put you in. She got a room at the St. John's Rehab Hospital. And she was discharged on the Wednesday. They would have done Tuesday, but we had that little ice storm. You know that one? The second school closure in 1 week. And so she ended up at St. John's. Not only did she end up at St. John's because of which is across the street from my uncle's house, by the way. So it's very, very convenient. So my uncle can help, and my parents, we can park there and just walk across the street, don't have to pay the parking. So my mother is in St. John's, and it just so happens that the nurse that's in charge of her, she's Chinese and can speak Chinese too. The physiotherapist is also Chinese and can speak Chinese. You gotta understand, my mother's English is not that great. She only learned English after my sister had her children, because my mother speaks French. And so it wasn't until the kids started growing up that she had to learn English. In our family, we always spoke Chinese, because my father speaks English, my mother speaks French, and so the common denominator is Chinese. So there's one lesson to be learned. I would say that today's message is one that I'll give my mother. God's sovereignty trumps circumstance. No matter how bad it looks in your life, no matter what obstacles, what challenges you have, whatever you face, and you think you've got no one there, you're facing it alone, whatever you think, that is a mountain too high to climb. Put God first. The message of Haggai is very clear that his sovereignty, his power, his presence is greater than whatever challenge is facing you. So long as you keep the covenant of putting God first in all things, love the Lord your God upon you, all your soul, all your mind, all your strength, your whole being, God will triumph. Yeah, Patsy, go do yourself this morning.
Can you stand with us, please? Turn your eyes upon Jesus, the Father is wonderful name, and the things of earth will grow strangely in the light of His glory and grace. Turn your eyes upon Jesus, the Father grow strangely dim in the light of His glory and sing. And the things of man will grow strangely dim in the light of His glory and grace.
Now to Him who has loved us and freed us from our sins by His blood, and has made us a kingdom, priests to His God and Father. To Him be glory and dominion, now and forever. Amen. After time meditation, we're dismissed.
Can I move this? Okay. Yeah, microphone.
Yeah, you can put it.